back in the early 1990s, we were brewing on a 10-barrel brew house. As we got bigger and started hitting larger markets, we decided to put in a 100-barrel brew house. But one of the big issues that we ran into is at the time we used to take our spent grain to a local community garden that the city would let people farm on. As we got bigger, we couldn't do that anymore. We were basically overrunning the garden. So we had to come up with another way to get rid of our grain. Juneau doesn't have any farms or animals, so we had to ship it down to Seattle. To do that, we needed to dry it. So our grain dryer drum that you see behind us is how we process all our spent grains coming off our brew house. So the drum behind us turns, it's all electric motors. The actual process of moving the grain through the dryer is done by a large fan. So the grain goes into the drum wet, and as it dries, it'll pass through the drum as it gets sucked through. And by doing that, we can control how wet the grain is, because we want it as dry as possible. When it gets to the end, it goes into our biomass boiler. The biomass boiler takes that as a fuel, blows it into its burn chamber that's about 1800 degrees, so very hot, and that spent grain will basically explode like fuel does going in there. The heat from that biomass boiler goes back into our grain dryer because grain drying is a very energy intensive process, and we need about half of that fuel value to re-dry more incoming grain. So it's basically a self-sustaining process. So it's basically making its own fuel to keep running. When that's all done, we actually still have about 50% of that fuel capacity left over. We go into the brew house with that through steam lines, and that helps run our brew kettle and our mash tun, and offsets 50% of the fuel that we would normally use to make the same batch of beer that we were doing 20 years ago. As we went through this process, we found out that grain didn't burn very good. It didn't burn anywhere near close to what wood does. So that began our 20-year process of trying to figure out how to make the spent grain burn better. We initially went through a bunch of iterations. We're now on our 4th burner upgrade. And through each of these steps, we learned better and better how our grain worked. And when we got to the end and finally could burn 100% spent grain, we became the only craft brewery at the time, or actually only entity at the time, that burned 100% spent grain. Other people in the world have tried it and were not able to do it without mixing some wood into it. So ours is a pretty unique process.